Hi, this is Kirk, the bariatric carnivore. Why in the world am I not concerned about eating all this saturated fat and meat? I mean, shouldn't you be concerned about it? Shouldn't you follow the American Heart Association guidelines of less than 10% of your caloric intake being from saturated fat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Well, I'm not, and here's why. There's been several studies that have come out really in the last 15 years that keep pointing out the fact that saturated fat in the diet is not a dietary concern. The Cochrane Group, which does the best studies out there, they look at all the studies and they compare them, and they do what they call a meta-analysis, which is really the highest standard of evidence that we have in evidence-based medicine. And they said, look, saturated fat's not a problem. The American Academy of Cardiology, I mean, these are the dudes that really pushed hardest for getting that amount of saturated fat down. Finally concluded in 2020. Now, you may not have heard about it because it came out in the middle of COVID, but they came out and said we can't find any evidence to support worrying about broad-based recommendations for saturated fat. In other words, nobody really cares. They just don't publicize it widely. And that's frustrating to me. For over 50 years, ever since the time of Ancel Keys, we've been running all these scare tactics saying that we need to cut out red meat, that it's as bad as smoking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yet there was never any real evidence for it put out by a guy by the name of Ancel Keys. Now, Ancel Keys was not an MD. I mean, his specialty started off, he has his PhD in physiology. And what he proposed was that heart attacks were being caused by the consumption of animal fat. Now, to me, that was just really, on the face of it, one of the dumbest things of all time. If you look back, the best medical records we have in the United States are at the Boston Hospital. And when you look at the Boston General Hospital records, there were no heart attacks before sometime around 1905. And it was such a big event that they really wrote that up. That somebody's heart stopped, and they thought that was really spectacular. But something weird was happening across the country about that time. From 1910, when really about the first beginnings that there was something going on with people's hearts and they were stopping, to about 1958, there's this growing concern, and there was this little group called the American Heart Association that was out, trying to figure out what was going on and what was stopping people's hearts. Now, we've been on this planet for a long time. People have been eating meat for a very long time. But something happened that got into our diets somewhere in the 1880s and kind of continued. And I would suspect any rational person would say, what did we do differently for the last 70 years that may be causing these heart attacks? But what did they blame? What did Ancel Keys blame for heart attacks? Which is a fairly sudden thing that's springing out all over the place. He blamed meat, the one thing that's been around forever. That makes absolutely zero sense. Why didn't he look at the fact that people were smoking? Half the adult population by the 1960s were smoking before the Surgeon General's warning came out. That started in the late 1800s, where factory cigarettes were starting. Why not look at, vegetable oils, processed seed oils, which Crisco came out in the late 1800s, and then Shazam! 30 years later, people are starting to have heart attacks. Maybe you could have blamed those. How about the increased consumption of sugar? I mean, back before the 1880s, it was difficult to get sugar. Sugar was a luxury item. Only the very rich had it. And even they ate it in small quantities. But because of some modern changes in food processing, sugar was getting ubiquitous. The consumption of sugar skyrocketed from less than 20 pounds or so per year to hundreds of pounds. I mean, people were starting to shovel that stuff down. Now, to me, those would have been three things that you could have really looked at. Why blame meat, which we've been eating for thousands, if not millions of years? But Ancel had the answer. He had what was called the 7-country study. And he had this great graph that showed that in countries that ate the most dietary fat, they had the highest rates of heart attacks. But he cherry-picked the dang data. He actually did a 23-country study. And when you looked at all 23 countries, some countries were real outliers. Countries like Germany, Switzerland, France ate a huge amount of fat, a lot of animal products, yet they had much lower rates of heart attack. There was no correlation between dietary fat and heart attacks. But when you looked at the data from the consumption of sugar, oh my gosh, that changed the data completely. Then there was a great straight line graph that showed places like France, Germany, and Switzerland didn't eat a lot of sugar. They may have eaten a lot of fat. They didn't have heart attacks. But in countries where they ate a lot of sugar, like the United States, we were having a lot of heart attacks. So we were blaming the wrong thing. And we keep seeing that time and time again in medicine. And unfortunately, science advances one funeral at a time. Now, the question is, why did the American Heart Association, why did they come out so strongly in favor of reducing dietary fat and reduce meat? I don't know. It could be the fact that they received a huge grant from Procter & Gamble, the largest manufacturer of processed seed oils in the planet. They funded the organization. That was an organization of maybe 4 or 5 people with a small little office and a dinky little journal that nobody paid attention to until they started getting lots of money from big food. If you don't believe me, poke around a little bit. Google it. You're going to see that there's this the war against dietary fat and against meat has been from the best science that money could buy. Some guy found a treasure trove of great information about how Big Sugar bought off the Harvard School of Public Health to demonize meat and not attack sugar. Some of it was in the form of almost direct bribes by paying honorariums and speaker fees, and they paid for a lot of studies. Big Food behaves a lot like Big Tobacco. They hide all the evidence that they can, showing that their product is dangerous by doing lots of studies, obfuscating it. Whenever congressmen want to find out what's the latest in dietary research, there's somebody from a processed food manufacturing there with the latest, hottest, greatest study out there showing that their food is absolutely fine. When I say the system is psychopathic, I'm not kidding. There isn't anybody in DC and Big Food or anybody else that's looking after your health. They're looking after their bottom lines. Again, use your common sense. Take a look at what we've been eating ancestrally for a long time. Did we have heart attacks? Did we have the cancer rates that we have now? No. It wasn't until we started getting processed food into the mix, when we started adding artificial vegetables, which were never tested. Not like today. I don't think you could get vegetable oils approved if they were coming out today. There's no way it could happen. Too many side effects. But we never studied it. We never go back and look at it because it's a multi-billion-dollar business. If you saw how factory fats were made, you would not ever touch them. Because you have to, in order to make them halfway palatable, you have to chemically treat them so much just to deodorize the stuff because it reeks. It smells like industrial machine oil because it is. That's what it was created for. Crisco's original stuff was used as lubricant in industrial machinery. Then somebody noticed, gosh, it kind of looks like soap. Maybe we could make a soap out of it and make it cheaper. Then somebody said, wow, this bar looks kind of like lard. Why don't we just sell it to people like we would lard and call it modern cooking? And they spent a lot of money convincing people that, all the modern people were using Crisco and not that old-fashioned lard. And then they turn around and demonize meat. Now, things are coming around full circle. More and more the evidence is just unescapable. meat is fine. Meat isn't going to kill you. It's the processed foods that will. And it just keeps showing up time and time again if you're willing to look for it. Look, not everybody's going to take my message. Not everybody's going to say, gosh, I think you're right. I mean, why should they? I'm just a guy who's trying to be healthy, and when he's getting 60. But I've gotten rid of all that stuff. Matter of fact, it's gotten to the point now where, frankly, if some chef puts it on my meat, it kind of makes me sick. My tolerance for vegetable oils has gone down. I can't take sugar, on like I used to. All that stuff is gone. And hopefully, when you get processed food out of your diet, your tolerance for it's going to go down too. But always remember, whenever you read a study, try to look for the money behind it. Remember, most of the science that we see today is the best science that money can buy, and we keep seeing it time and time again. If you haven't learned anything in the last 3 years, you're not really paying attention. This channel probably isn't for you. But if you're looking at this thing and you're going, yeah, I'm going to dig into this a little bit more, because I think he's got a point. That was ancestrally smart stuff for us to eat for millennia. Why is it suddenly bad now? And why are we not looking at the processed stuff that we were injecting into the food supply? Sugar and vegetable oils in particular. That stuff really should be held up as a culprit. And that's just radical common sense. Hopefully, if this kind of makes sense to you, please hit the like, subscribe button. I'll be putting out new videos every day. And frankly, if you listen to this and you're going, I think this guy's full of it, then don't hit subscribe. You're not part of this tribe. This is for people that really want to make a difference and improve their health for the good. This is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. We'll talk to you tomorrow.